looking at how challenging 2020 was, not only as a year, just, nationally and globally, really, but particularly, communities of color and particularly Black communities, there was a lot of light that was shown on what was taking place in these communities. There was an opportunity to see the impacts of police brutality and racism and how the whole social structure was kind of like been thrown on its head. So I wanted to get some reflections from both of you really on in the face of that, where would you say we are in the perspective of the trajectory of the Black community and, with dealing with race in the food system, racial justice in general, and the ideas of Black food sovereignty is when I really wanted to get to the core of your reflections around. I know one of the things for me, just as my immediate reflection, is seeing how things took place. It was, like I said, it was an opportunity for people to kind of really see what's going on on an issue within the Black community that's kind of just been, we'd say, honestly pushed under the rug for like a really long time, or pushed to the side in the face of other social conversations. And it was a prime opportunity not only to kind of just see where, how these stark disparities are taking place socially and racially, seeing how that impacts the communities, not just as Black people, but when you impact one community, you're impacting others, right? Not only seeing that, but also seeing that there's almost feel like a renewed sense of spirit around celebrating Blackness, around what it means to be Black, and also, of course, where we work within the food system, what Black food sovereignty looks like and what it means to grow food and things of that nature. So that's one of the things that I'd say is like a really kind of testament of not only the resilience of Black folks in the face of, tragic, or the face of, what do you want to call it, the adversities, to put it, to use a nice word around it, that we face. But I wanted to kind of really hear more and hear how both of you expound on your reflections on what took place and how we can like look forward in the face of that. So either of you can share.
I can start.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's coming up to me for that question is that for the Black community, I don't think anything has changed. I think that the work around Black food sovereignty just continues to go. It continues to move forward. I think that there, like you said, because of 2020, because of the impact of COVID-19 on Black communities, because of the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, more people who aren't Black are awakened to the multiple ways that violence and discrimination and oppression around Black people is manifesting. It's manifesting in like police murder. It's manifesting in increases of death and severity of COVID because of our underlying conditions, which are again a result of the environments in which we live in. And so I think that for a lot of people, there's more focus on that, but that's stuff that we knew. And the work towards Black food sovereignty continues, and I think it gets bolstered. I think what's been different is that there's now more, like you said, more attention and more resources being put towards that, which is really good and helps us move the work forward even in better. But I think the thing that I'm in the back of my mind is like, how long does this attention continue, right? Like how long? Because people are like, oh, now more than ever, which, I've heard people say to me, and I'm just like, well, for me, it's not now more than ever. It's like there's a history of police murdering Black people. I grew up in Montreal, and like in the 90s, there were multiple Black men who got shot by the police. And so it's like, this is not a new thing. And again, we're just talking about police violence. There are multiple systems, mass incarceration, convict leasing, chattel slavery, all of these things that we have to keep, all these policies and practices that have continued to be placed on us, that we continually have to like struggle against and like build alternatives to, because, and this is how when people talk about anti-Blackness, this is how it plays out, right? It's like these policies and practices are particularly created to oppress Black people, and other people of color as a result also get oppressed. But this is why it's important to pool those resources and really focus on helping the Black community, because the policies and practices are geared towards oppressing Black communities, the support and resources have to go towards Black communities. And when you do that, and when you center them, then everybody else's life gets improved.
I would definitely echo everything that Suzanne just shared, and just really want to emphasize again that, you know, to Suzanne's point, it isn't now more than ever, it's been like forever. And for those folks who are just waking up to the realities that Black communities have been living through since the first invasions of many of the different kingdoms and nations of Africa, like, this has been going on for centuries and has not been really addressed. I think there have been multiple movements, like the civil rights movements, where some things have changed, but there hasn't really been a lot of political power actually to really enforce some of the laws and legislations that have been put into place to protect Black communities as well as other communities. And so I think that now, like in terms of now, more people are becoming, well, I would argue, moving from a place of denial to where they just can't unsee what they're seeing. They can't deny that this has been a reality like right now. And as more people are seeing it, are really starting to look back at the history and starting to understand that. So I think it is a critical moment. And like Suzanne, I have a similar question of like, are people gonna just be aghast, oh my God, and then just move on with their lives? Or are they actually going to see this as an opportunity to unlearn a lot of the history and the cover up of history that we've been taught in our education system and just through the media culture that we've all experienced? And, you know, for example, growing up, what I remember on television was Roots and a lot of cop shows showing Black folks being arrested for, you know, basically some misdemeanor crimes that are blown up to be like these huge criminal activities without any analysis of the circumstances and situations of the folks who are experiencing abject poverty, in like not having access to healthy food, like all of the things that we talk about, and just like the police brutality and violence in and of itself. Like that time period really sensationalized the brutalizing and arresting of Black and brown bodies. That's what was in our media. And then the Bill Cosby show, like, what was that? Do you all remember the name?
Cosby Show.
Bill Cosby Show.
Okay.
He kept it simple for us.
I'm just like that was, you know, like one of the only kind of positive images of Black families, Black communities in media.
Different world in college.
Yeah, the different world. Yes. And so I just feel like the narrative that has been put out there about Black communities is also something that needs to shift and change. And the work that many people, many communities in the Black food sovereignty movement here in the U.S. and I think internationally, like that's a big part of the work that they're doing as well, is resurfacing histories that have been forgotten. We can argue intentionally forgotten and buried, like Black Wall Street out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Black businesses that were thriving and communities that were thriving and businesses taking care of those communities being destroyed by white supremacy, and there being no legal activity taken towards those white folks who completely demolished entire neighborhoods and thriving communities that Black folks have built, despite, again, the limitations and legal legislations.
To the point that Lori's making about narrative and like how like media in particular is like one of the ways, like we're talking, because all of this is about like systemic structural racism, right? And like how all of these things work together, how like the policies and practices we're talking about, like redlining, you know, discriminating against Black folks getting access to the National Housing Act, you know, not getting like the Social Security Act, like excluding domestic and agricultural workers when 75% of Black people were those types of workers, like all of that. And then like, you know, throughout time, they work together. So the policies work together with the media, and the media like emphasizes that Black people are like, are criminals and things like that. So they're, whether that's intentional or not, it's like all of these different like kind of institutions working together to like emphasize this these stereotypes and perceptions of Black people, and like hide the fact of what's really happening. And that is a part of why narrative and portrayals of Black people is so important.
This new reality around, like, you know, it's kind of like how everything like Blackness is becoming this thing, and like looking at the stigmas that have long existed around Black people and how we deal with the land, and like and that whole thing, like why it's so important that we're seeing kind of like a quote unquote resurgence or what have you of more Black people, especially young people, that are like going to the land and dealing with growing food and, you know, having urban gardens and things like that. The whole idea of looking towards Black food sovereignty. If you just expound on, or like we both expound in your own way on, like why that's so important as we look into 2021 and beyond.
Well, I would say one thing is definitely more and more people are starting to learn more, like as more information around the full history of Black farmers and agriculture experience here in the U.S. comes to light. People are healing in a way from the historical experience and the historical narrative that has placed Black people in this role of enslavement, and like kind of limited our history to being that's what it was, you know, like we were an enslaved people and that's kind of it. That's kind of like the predominating narrative that exists. And even when I told some of my really close Black friends that I was getting into, you know, urban agriculture and gardening when I lived in the city, and now that, you know, starting a farm here in Chester, New York, like one of the responses, or often the response is like, why would you want to do that? We fought so hard to get away from that, you know? So it's definitely, you know, that has been part of what's prevented folks from returning to the land. And because the land in many ways has represented a lot of pain for people, like historically and just within our DNA, which is sad, because the other piece, you know, again, that's like people are starting to reconnect with, is the fact that the reason why folks were brought from East Africa or West Africa and different places into the United States was exactly because of their agricultural skill and knowledge. And they were exploited. They were brought here and exploited for that. And so part of what we're seeing in terms of the resurgence of folks going, I don't want to say going back to the land, but reconnecting and healing with the land, I would say, because the land itself, a lot of folks, you know, are starting to recognize and acknowledge and talk about how the land itself was witness to all of this violence against folks, against Black bodies, and now against brown bodies that are in similar ways being brought and exploited for their skill and their knowledge and their labor to work the lands here. So as folks are reconnecting and relearning their histories, relearning about, you know, and from grandmas and aunties and the elders in the community about the different plants that folks used for healing, it's giving people, it's like reconnecting people with parts of themselves that have been lost and buried.
Lorrie said it at the beginning, it's about healing. I think reconnecting to the land is healing the experiences that we've had in this kind of capitalist society that has really just been about exploiting our bodies. And really reconnecting to, I have a friend, Allison Guest, who is a researcher, and she does a lot of work around Black people and their relationship to land. And she's done work with like the Black Land Project, which is another great resource. And, you know, she's the one who said, she goes, you know, indigeneity is about relationship to the land, and that Black people are indigenous as well. But like Lorrie said, because of our relationship here in the Americas to land, because we were exploited on the land, for many of us, it's still really painful and feels backwards, and doesn't feel like progress, as all of us in this society are told. I mean, I remember when I graduated grad school, which is where I really started to learn about urban ag, both in school and then like just through the people that I met here in New York. And I told my parents, like, I want to farm. And they were like, okay. You know, it's like, you just went to grad school for 2 years and now you want to farm. Like, what about that office job? You know, and it's interesting too, because both of my parents are from Barbados, and both families were farmed in some way or fashion. My dad's family more so, they had land, and they were able to like provide for themselves by farming. And it's like, you know, my dad still grows food every year too. And it's also like, sometimes it's reconnecting all of these different pieces, because for me, like I know my mind was awakened and turned when I first stepped into a Black urban growers meeting, and it was all Black women who farmed in the city. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is happening? Like, and so just learning about all the different projects that people were like stewarding, was just a whole other aspect of like history and tradition that I didn't know about in that way. And then, so through my participation in La Finca del Sur's urban farm, and being with mostly Black and brown women, like, again, it's just another way, coming from all different, from, you know, born and raised here in New York, coming from like Guyana, the Caribbean, parts of Africa, like, you know, it was just a way that like history and tradition was being embodied and practiced and seen in person. And so when my parents would come, they would help me, you know, tend to my bed and work at the farm and things like that. And so I think it changed you know, like they had an appreciation for the skills that they had, but like now on a larger level, because it was being connected to all this other work that that they were able to see and participate in. So I think that that's really important, because it was about like being able, first of all, to have the power to grow your own food and like sustain yourself is so powerful. And we really need to like amplify that narrative. But then all of the things that's connected to, the cooperatives that were started, all of these alternative systems that were about nourishing and having the community thrive, like it's all connecting to being able to grow your own food and having a healing relationship to the land.